early July, the United States and the Republic of Korea announced the deployment in South Korea of the U.S. anti-ballistic missile system called THAAD, Terminal High Altitude Area Defense. The reason, according to the U.S., was North Korea's continued development of ballistic missiles and weapons of mass destruction in opposition to its commitments to the international community, which requires, the U.S. said, our alliance to ensure that we retain the ability to defend ourselves in the face of this threat. China's reaction was swift and strong. China is very unsatisfied and resolutely opposes the deployment. China's foreign ministry said the missile system is unhelpful in realizing the goal of denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, is not good for the stabilization of the peninsula, runs counter to the efforts of negotiations, and will severely damage the safety of China and nearby countries and the regional strategic balance. How does China explain its objections? How to achieve regional stability? What's China's advice? To understand China's position is to be closer to China. In July, the South Korean government announced that it would work with the United States to deploy the anti-ballistic missile system called THAAD, or Terminal High Altitude Area Defense. The reason, of course, is to defend itself against the threat of North Korean missiles. China sees ulterior reasons. China sees the deployment of THAAD in South Korea as unsettling and expresses strong opposition.
我们认为，美国部署萨德导弹系统，明显超出了半岛的防卫的需求。我们完全有理由，也有权利来质疑这一举措背后的图谋。
It should be understood as a direct threat to China because this radar, under the pretext of defending South Korea from North Korean missiles, is actually a highly sophisticated radar and surveillance system that allows the United States to surveil, spy on every piece of China, including its most secret and most sensitive military installations. China won't stand for it.
To understand China's position on the deployment of the U.S. anti-ballistic missile system THAAD in South Korea, I speak with two thought leaders on China-U.S. relations. He Yafei is a former Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs who was responsible for North American affairs. And Senior Colonel Zhao Xiaozhuo is Director of the Center of China-U.S. Defense Relations in the Academy of Military Sciences of the PLA. Welcome.
Thank you.
The Republic of Korea, South Korea, has been considering this system, this anti-ballistic missile system that we call THAAD, Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, for many years. What is it about now, today, that President Park has made the decision for deployment? Mr. He.
Well, as you have said, that despite repeated opposition from China, the United States and South Korea has finally decided or agreed to deploy THAAD anti-missile system on the soil of South Korea, R.L.Kuhn. R.L.Kuhn being a close ally in East Asia, certainly has been under strong pressure from the United States for some years now to deploy the anti-missile system, THAAD system. And South Korea, on the other hand, of course, is a close or a very close trading partner of China. And almost a quarter of South Korea's external trade is with China. South Korea, R.L.Kuhn, has been in a dilemma, so to speak, between a rock and a hard place. So it has been wavering for some time. It's very difficult for it to decide. But in the end, as you see, that R.L.Kuhn has gone for the deployment. As I see it, it has put the military alliance above its trading relationship with China.
If I was in the position of a person in South Korea, I mean, I would be genuinely worried about what was happening in the DPRK or North Korea. They have reportedly 10 to 20 operational, even though they might be early stage nuclear weapons. They test missiles. I mean, there seems to be real concern, so that it's more than just an economics versus military alliance. There is a fear in South Korea. Senior Colonel Zhao, from China's point of view, what are the military reasons why it opposes the deployment of this anti-missile system, which seems to be purely defensive in nature?
There is a threat from the DPRK, a missile threat or artillery threat, from the feeling of the people in the ROK. So I think it's understandable for them to establish missile defense systems or the systems to fight against the artillery or any forces. I think what the ROK needed the most is the system to counter the artillery threat. Not only so much the threat, artillery threat, because the DPRK has deployed the artillery just above the demilitarized zone, and there are tens of thousands of the artillery. They can, fire the artillery at the same time, and they can hit the capital of the ROK. So,
in terms of the artillery, huge amounts of artillery in the air, you can't defend against that with these systems, that's for sure. But I want to ask you specifically in terms of what is China's military concern about this system?
You see, the THAAD deployment, the ROK, can play two roles. The one role that is missile defense in the terminal phase.
Not the boost phase.
In the terminal phase, that is one role. And another one is the role in the boost phase. So in the terminal phase, that is the radar or the NTPY-2 X-band radar can be played as a fire control radar to guide to intercept the incoming missiles.
Right.
But also it can be played as a detection point for the whole system of the THAAD. So, and also because of the radar has a surveillance range of about more than 1,000 kilometers, about 2,000 kilometers. That means all the activities in northeast or the central part of China can be detected.
This is what the U.S. military calls THAAD, Terminal High Altitude Area Defense. Here's how it works. There are three main components: a powerful radar that detects incoming missiles, a mobile command center, and a launcher mounted to a truck that fires an anti-missile interceptor that must hit the incoming missile directly, using the kinetic energy of raw speed to destroy it. What worries China most is the radar that, in certain configurations, can scan the skies effective up to 2,000 kilometers, meaning China's military activities could be monitored by South Korea and by the United States. South Korea promised that the THAAD radar would be directed toward North Korea exclusively, and that it would not have sufficient range to cover China. I asked Mr. He, you presented a strategic balance in terms of strategy versus economics. So broaden it from your significant experience in foreign affairs to the whole Northeast, because you have Japan, you have the Republic of Korea in the South, the U.S. Do you see this as more forming an alliance in kind of a containing China? I mean, is that the, do you think the intent here?
The deployment of THAAD system in South Korea, it completes, I think, the U.S. deployment of anti-missile system, or theater anti-missile system in East Asia. Had it on Japan, in Japan, and now in South Korea. You can see clearly, even if the U.S. has repeatedly saying this is against quote-unquote threat from DPRK, but it's obviously against China. It breaks down the existing regional strategic balance. If that balance is broken down, then the possibility will arise that recurrence of war could happen.
If you were a diplomat in the Republic of Korea with your elegance and sophistication, and you indeed saw no progress in the six-party talks over a period of years, whatever the reasons and whatever the fault, and you saw the continuing development of nuclear weapons and the rhetoric, call it rhetoric, coming out of the North in terms of extreme language, wouldn't you be in a position of worry about your responsibilities?
Efforts by DPRK to develop nuclear missile capabilities have been opposed from the beginning by the international community.
Including China.
Including China, in the form of the Security Council resolutions, even including some sanction measures against DPRK. And the THAAD deployment, it's very sad to know that it is an exaggeration. They exaggerated the quote-unquote threat from, so-called threat from DPRK. And you know, China maintains a policy of minimum nuclear deterrence. And that deterrence...
Just enough to deter.
Just enough to deter. We won't spend more money on that, but what you can see is that somebody is trying to upset the apple cart. If that balance is destroyed, I mean, it's not yet, but because our system is not in place. If that balance is destroyed, then you can foresee a situation where China has to react in some way to restore that balance.
Colonel Zhao, how does this, from a technical point of view, change the balance so that now the U.S. has a greater advantage?
The THAAD system, it has the most powerful surveillance radar in the world, I think, since it has a very narrow band, so it can see clearly, much clearer than others. And since it deployed, it moved from Guam, from Hawaii to the R.L.Kuhn. So I think the more near China and the more tax.
Now, South Korea has promised that it would not focus on China. It would be always toward the DPRK, North Korea, and it would limit the range to 500-600 kilometers, whatever it is, would not go to 1,000 or 2,000, that it would limit the range so that it would not look at China, would not have that capability. Yet China does not take that promise too helpfully.
But that's what we say. Whether you are perception-based or capability-based, and whatever your interlocutor is saying, I'm not looking at you, I will not look at you. But if he or she has that capability, he can see you. In the eventuality that there is a need to do so, it can do it. To be capability-based.
We'll be right back for more discussions of the strategy and the science. China-based analysts say the deployment of THAAD in South Korea will stir up more trouble on the already volatile Korean peninsula. Before South Korea announced its decision, its ties with China were improving steadily, entering a honeymoon period, as it were. In 2015, China was South Korea's largest trading partner. The Chinese market has become vital for many South Korean industries, including entertainment, tourism, and automobiles. But some experts worry that the deployment of THAAD will adversely affect China-Korean relations. China has been trying to broker peace between the two Koreas. No one wants wars on its doorstep. Russia also shares China's concern.
Мы едины в том, что северокорейская сторона должна от любых новых безответственных шагов и одновременно подчеркнули контрпродуктивность и опасность попыток использовать действия Пхеньяна при всей их неприемлемости как предлог, как повод для наращивания военного потенциала в регионе и развертывания здесь позиционного района глобальной противоракетной обороны Соединенных Штатов Америки.
And South Korea's deploying the THAAD system has, no surprise, angered North Korea, which conducted 2 missile tests soon after South Korea made the announcement, one of which landed in Japanese-controlled waters. The South Korean people wonder what is an alternative in the face of threats of nuclear devastation. And will the deployment of THAAD cause an arms race in the region? Welcome back. Let me give you, from a Western perspective, what is one of the deep underlying problems here. And that says the following: mutually assured destruction, the mad policy of the Cold War and existing today, as Mr. He, you were saying, has worked in the past because the U.S., Russia, China are rational actors. And the feeling is that North Korea is not a rational actor, and therefore the people responsible for the safety of South Korea have to realize for the comfort, even psychological comfort, of their people. Mr. Ha, how do you react to that?
Rationality or irrationality is not defined by one country alone. We can say country A is irrational. What is your basis for saying that, for that conclusion? This is one thing. Secondly, as I suggested, even if there's a threat, a nuclear missile threat from DPRK, THAAD is not the right response. It's not the appropriate response, as Senior Colonel Zhao has suggested.
Senior Colonel Zhao, it is China's continuing policy that it is seeking a denuclearization of the entire peninsula, which means getting North Korea, DPRK, to eliminate its nuclear weapons. That is China's policy, is that correct?
Just as you mentioned about the irrational behavior, or the behavior in an irrational way for the DPRK. I think over the years we have, give great pressure for the DPRK to give up its nuclear programs. But in fact, there is a deep set question we have not asked. Why the DPRK tries to work so hard to develop nuclear weapons? I think that is because of its insecurity. Deep insecurity in face of the great pressure given by the United States and the ROK, the military exercises, the military plans to push the collapse of the North Korea. And for the DPRK, or the leadership of the DPRK, they have to think of how to defend themselves. And since the end of the Second World War, the United States has intervened militarily so many times in various international affairs, but it has never targeted at a nuclear country, a nuclear power.
Many analysts in the West have now said, we now think it's impossible, that there's no circumstance, no matter what China does, no matter what the U.S. does, under no circumstance will the DPRK give up its nuclear weapons for exactly the reason that you just said, because it needs to protect its own political structure. So we have to now play defense rather than trying to to create a situation which we'd all like, denuclearization. If that's not going to happen, we have to go to Plan B. Mr. He?
You suggest that people see there is no way out of this crisis. I do not believe that is the end of the game. We need to persist in our efforts for a peaceful settlement. And on the argument for defense against quote-unquote threat from DPRK, the defense has been there all the time. When you look further behind the deployment, what is the strategy of the United States in East Asia? I read a piece in Foreign Affairs, latest issue of Foreign Affairs, by two professors, Professor Mearsheimer and Walt, on offshore balance. Offshore balancing as a superior grand strategy of the United States. I think it's quite representative of what is the mainstream thinking or mainstream thinking in Washington.
I would have to say that both professors have a reputation of saying things that are controversial. They've done the same thing regarding Israel, which is not accepted more generally. But it is certainly a position that is out there. I give you that.
On East Asia, they have, I think their views coincides with what is being practicing by the military United States government, that is trying to single out China as a possible regional hegemon that will challenge the DLP, what we call DLP of American position, that is dominance, leadership, and primacy. So you cannot blame China for thinking along these lines.
Senior Colonel Zhao, if the THAAD is deployed and then China sees that as a real threat, which China does, I may disagree, but doesn't matter what I think, that's what China thinks, and then increases its penetration capability that you just said, then the U.S. will see that as an excuse to develop more weapons, and then it might react. So we don't want to be caught in that spiral. That's what I'm worried about. How can we limit the spiraling of the arms race and yet restore the technical balance that you're concerned about?
I think if the U.S. and the DPRK are determined to deploy the THAAD system, it should have, better communications, more conversations,
transparency
with China and Russia, and ask others to investigate what's going on.
Mr. He, what would you advise if you were sort of sitting in an omnipresent view for both sides in order to move forward in the negotiations? I mean, what specific steps would you take now? Because where we are now compared to the last time we had six-party talks, we have negative facts on the ground in both cases. We have more nuclear weapons in the DPRK, and we have, assuming the deployment of THAAD in South Korea. So we have on both sides more problems than we had before when we couldn't get it started. How to do so today?
Well, first I will react to what you have said about the spiral into further nuclear arms race. We can see that has been already happened between Russia and the United States. Certainly we do not want to see that happen between China and the United States. It's not a win-win solution. It's a lose-lose solution. Sure. to both sides. So what I would suggest is, on the issue of maintaining regional balance, strategic balance, U.S.-China needs to talk on that specific issue. Whether talk about technical capabilities, whether talking about on-site inspection, whether talking about total rethink that decision, they need to talk.
How about military relations between China and Russia if this deployment goes through?
I think it will strengthen the cooperation between China and Russia, and either in the area of missile defense, because China just at the starting point at the research of the missile defense system, and Russia is more experienced.
Given the choice between China-Russia increased military cooperation and China-South Korea increased economic cooperation, I personally would choose the latter, and I hope circumstances allow that. Mr. Ha, if you have to give a specific advice to each of the parties involved here, what would you tell them that they should do now?
I think the one advice I could give, humble advice I could give, is to sit down and talk before we all take any actions or interactions or counteractions. We need to talk this through. And for ROK, I think you're right. I agree with you that the economic cooperation, the benefits of economic cooperation, way outweigh the so-called security concerns they have. In this era of global economic slowdown, everybody is thinking about economic growth. How can we promote economic growth? I don't think it is wise for ROK to go in the other direction.
Well, we'll obviously monitor the situation as it develops, but I can't help believe that the economics of this should outweigh the military nature of it, and we all have to figure out a way how to make that happen. Mr. Ha, Senior Colonel Zhao, thank you.
Thank you very much.
From the U.S. perspective, the THAAD anti-ballistic missile system will be focused solely on North Korean nuclear and missile threats and not be directed towards any third-party nations. From China's perspective, the advanced U.S. missile system will seriously harm China's strategic security interests and regional strategic balance, and countermeasures must be taken. The U.S. says China brought the problem on itself by not controlling the DPRK's, North Korea's, nuclear and missile ambitions, which flout the international community. China says the U.S. is taking advantage of a complex problem to gain strategic advantage. The U.S. says only its radars and missiles can deal with the threat. China says they reach deep into Chinese territory and are destabilizing. The core question is, how can China, the U.S., and South Korea cooperate with respect to North Korea, whose nuclear weapons and missile programs continue unabated? Westerners should appreciate that trouble on the Korean Peninsula means unwanted instability on China's doorstep. For years, China and the U.S. worked together in the six-party talks and in the UN. China's relations with South Korea were becoming a bulwark of regional stability. Now it seems each has slipped back. All should figure out why. That's closer to China.